I descended 7 miles beneath the Pacific Ocean in a submersible barely large enough for 2 people. My stomach twisted from both the pressure changes and the nerves that had plagued me since accepting this assignment. The tiny vessel creaked and popped as we sank deeper, the darkness outside growing more absolute with each passing minute until it seemed to have weight and substance. The pilot, a silent man who hadn't offered more than 10 words since we'd left the surface, focused entirely on his instruments. "First time in the deep?" he asked, breaking the hours-long silence. "Yeah," I managed, swallowing hard as my ears popped again. He nodded. "You'll get used to it, or you won't." That was the extent of our conversation for the remainder of the journey. When the lights of Abyssal 9 finally came into view through the small porthole, I pressed my face against the cold glass like a child. The research station materialized through the murky water like some steel cathedral rising from the seabed. Its exterior lights cut through the blackness, casting long, strange shadows across an ocean floor that few human eyes had ever seen. The illumination didn't comfort me as I'd expected. Instead, it only emphasized how utterly alone this structure was in the crushing darkness. "Home, sweet home," the pilot muttered as he guided us toward the docking bay. The docking procedure took nearly 20 minutes, the whole submersible shuddering as pressure equalized and clamps secured us in place. My legs felt weak as I climbed out, partly from being cramped for so long and partly from the knowledge that miles of ocean now separated me from the sun and sky. A woman waited at the airlock, her posture rigid and her gaze assessing me with clinical precision. Her ID badge read, "Dr. Marissa Ung, Station Director." "Mr. Cole," she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm and dry, her authority immediately clear. "Welcome to Abyssal 9. "Thank you, Dr. Ung. I'm looking forward to the work." The lie tasted metallic in my mouth. "I doubt that," she replied with unexpected frankness. "But we'll see if you're suited for it." She turned without waiting for my response and began walking. I grabbed my duffel bag and hurried after her through corridors that seemed to hum with the constant pressure of water against metal. The sound was subtle, but omnipresent, a reminder of our precarious situation. "The station operates on a 24-hour cycle to maintain circadian rhythms," Dr. Ung explained as we walked. "Though down here, time becomes flexible for some. You've been assigned to the biophysics research team, as requested. Your clearance allows access to levels 1 through 3. Level 4 requires my personal authorization." We passed through a series of hatches, each one marked with pressure ratings and emergency protocols. The corridors were utilitarian, steel walls, pipes running along ceilings, and LED strips that gave everything a bluish tint. The air smelled faintly of salt, metal, and something else I couldn't identify. "The main lab, mess hall, and recreation area are on level 2, she continued. "Medical is on level 1, along with communications and emergency response. Your quarters are on level 3 with the rest of the research team." As we rounded a corner into what appeared to be a control center, a man with curly black hair looked up from a bank of monitors. His smile seemed genuine, but I noticed how his eyes kept darting to the walls whenever the metal around us groaned. "Hey, new guy," he called out, spinning his chair to face me. "Jacob Ortiz, systems engineer and your unofficial welcome wagon." He extended his hand and I shook it. "How was the trip down?" "Long," I admitted. "And cramped." Jacob laughed. "Gets better after the first few trips. Maybe. Actually, it doesn't, but you stop noticing." His fingers drummed against his console in a nervous rhythm as he spoke. "I handle all the life support systems, communications, and basically anything else with wires. You need something fixed. I'm your guy." Dr. Ung checked her watch. "Mr. Ortiz, the hull integrity report?" Jacob's smile faltered. "All green, doctor. Pressure readings normal. Minor stress fluctuations in section 4B, but within acceptable parameters." She nodded curtly. "Continue monitoring. Mr. Cole needs to complete his medical check-in." We left Jacob to his monitors and continued down another corridor. I noticed how Dr. Ung walked, with purpose, never letting her hand trail along the walls as I found myself doing for reassurance. The medical bay was smaller than I expected, clinically white amid the station's industrial gray. A woman with short blonde hair was organizing supplies, her back to us as we entered. Her hands moved with precision, but I noticed a slight tremor as she sorted through medication vials. "Anna, this is Ethan Cole, our new biophysicist," Dr. Ung announced. The woman barely looked up, offering only a quick glance with pale blue eyes that seemed to take in everything about me in an instant. Medical kit in your quarters. Read the emergency protocols before you sleep. See me tomorrow for baseline readings. Her voice was quiet but clear. Anna Price is our medical officer, Dr. Ung explained. She'll conduct your physical tomorrow to establish baseline readings for pressure adaptation. Anna nodded without further comment, returning to her inventory. I noticed how her pale hands continued to tremble slightly as she worked. Let's get you settled, Dr. Ung said, leading me out of the medical bay. We took an elevator to level 3, the car descending with a slight lurch that made my stomach flip. The residential corridor was narrow, with doors spaced evenly on both sides. Each bore a name tag and small status indicator light. This is you, Dr. Ung said, stopping at a door marked E. Cole. She swiped her access card and the door slid open to reveal a space barely larger than a prison cell. A bunk was built into one wall with storage compartments underneath. A small desk with a computer terminal occupied the opposite wall. A tiny bathroom cubicle contained a toilet, sink, and shower stall, all designed for maximum efficiency in minimal space. The whole room was perhaps 10 feet by 8 feet. Your personal effects should have arrived with the last supply drop, Dr. Ung said. Meal times are posted in the mess hall. The schedule for your first week is on your terminal. She pointed to a laminated card taped above the bunk. Station rules. Memorize them. I moved closer to read the card. Abyssal 9 mandatory protocols. 1. Never look out the observation windows between 2 and 4 a.m. 2. Never respond to tapping on the hull, no matter how persistent. 3. If you hear a voice you recognize calling from outside the station, report it immediately. 4. Any food items not on the inventory manifest must be incinerated without examination. 5. If the emergency lights begin flashing red, lie flat on the floor until the all-clear sounds. I chuckled, turning to Dr. Ung. Is this some kind of initiation joke? Her expression didn't change. Those rules have kept us alive. Breaking them has consequences. The way she said it, flat, matter of fact, made my smile fade. No one else was laughing. Your orientation begins at 0800 tomorrow. Get some rest, Mr. Cole. She left without another word, the door sliding shut behind her. I sat on the edge of the bunk, the reality of my situation sinking in. 7 miles of water above my head, a steel box keeping the crushing pressure at bay, and bizarre rules that everyone took deadly seriously. I unpacked my few personal items, some books, photos, and clothes, and tried to make the sterile space feel somewhat mine. The computer terminal blinked with notifications, welcome messages, safety briefings, research protocols to review before morning. Despite my exhaustion, sleep wouldn't come. The station's mechanical sounds were constant, the hum of ventilation, the occasional groan of metal, the distant thrum of machinery maintaining our fragile bubble of habitability. My thoughts kept returning to the rules above my bed, particularly the first one. What possible reason could there be for such a specific prohibition? The digital clock on my terminal read 1:47. I tossed and turned for another 15 minutes before giving up. Perhaps a walk would help me adjust to my new environment. The corridor outside was dimly lit for night cycle, the blue-tinged emergency lights casting everything in ghostly relief. I wandered, memorizing my route, eventually finding my way to the Level 2 observation lounge. The room was dark except for the faint illumination coming through the large reinforced windows that looked out into the abyss. I checked the time on the wall clock, 2:15 in the morning. I remembered the first rule but dismissed it. Surely there was nothing sinister about looking out a window, regardless of the time. Probably just something to spook the newcomers. I approached one of the windows, placing my hand against the cold glass. The exterior lights illuminated perhaps 30 feet of the seabed before darkness swallowed everything. Strange rock formations cast long shadows, and small creatures occasionally darted through the light beams. That's when I saw it. A pale shape moved at the edge of the light. At first, I thought it was some kind of deep-sea fish, but as it drifted closer, I realized with growing horror that it was a face, distinctly human in form, but wrong in ways I couldn't immediately process. It floated toward the window with purposeful movement, not carried by currents, but propelling itself deliberately. I stood frozen as the face pressed against the glass from the outside, its features becoming clear in the station's lights. Milky eyes stared through the window, meeting mine with terrible recognition. Its mouth moved silently, forming words I couldn't hear but somehow felt I could almost understand. No human could survive at this depth. The pressure would crush anyone instantly. Yet here was this thing, looking in at me from the crushing darkness, trying to communicate. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest as the face continued its silent speech, pale hands now appearing to press against the glass alongside it. I staggered backward from the window, nearly tripping over my own feet. The face, that impossible human face pressed against the glass, vanished as quickly as it had appeared, melting back into the darkness beyond the station's exterior lights. My reflection stared back at me now, pale and wide-eyed in the observation room's dim lighting. 7 miles underwater. No human could survive that pressure, not even for seconds. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations. A trick of light on the glass, some unknown deep-sea creature with coincidentally humanoid features, or simply my exhausted mind playing tricks on me after the long descent. But those eyes had looked at me, not past me or through me, at me. They had recognized me somehow. I retreated to my quarters, the memory of that face burning in my mind. The station rules card seemed to mock me from above my bunk. Never look out the observation windows between 2 and 4 a.m. I had broken the very first rule on my very first night. By the time my alarm sounded at 7, I had perhaps 20 minutes of broken sleep. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand, and my thoughts moved with the sluggishness of cold honey. I splashed water on my face and studied my reflection in the small bathroom mirror. Dark circles had formed under my eyes, and my skin looked sallow under the harsh lighting. The mess hall was already half full when I arrived for breakfast. Various crew members hunched over their food, most eating with the mechanical efficiency of people fueling their bodies rather than enjoying a meal. The food itself was utilitarian: reconstituted eggs, synthetic bacon, and coffee that tasted faintly of the recycled water used to brew it. I grabbed a tray and joined the short line, nodding at a few unfamiliar faces who glanced up as I passed. None offered more than the briefest acknowledgement before returning to their food or tablets. 7 miles underwater didn't seem to encourage morning small talk. Anna Price sat alone in the corner, methodically cutting her food into precise bites. When I caught her eye, she didn't smile or wave, but her gaze lingered on my face, on the exhaustion surely written there. A slight nod from her, almost imperceptible, told me everything. She knew what I had done. Whether she had seen me in the observation room or simply recognized the particular brand of fatigue that came from breaking Rule 1, her knowing glance made my stomach tighten. I chose an empty table, not ready for conversation. The synthetic eggs tasted like nothing in my dry mouth. As I picked at my food, the events from last night replayed in my mind. Maybe I was first breakfast down here, right? Weird taste never really goes away. I looked up to find Jacob sliding into the seat across from me, his tray clattering as he set it down. His smile was quick but genuine, though his eyes darted around the room as he spoke, never settling on anything for long. "Is it that obvious I'm new?" I asked. "New faces stand out down here," he said, pouring an alarming amount of artificial sweetener into his coffee. "Plus, you've got that look." "What look?" "The one that says you're still processing where you are." His fingers drummed a nervous pattern on the table. "How'd you sleep? First night can be rough with all the noises." The question seemed innocent enough, but I caught his quick glance toward Anna, who was now watching us while pretending not to. "Not great," I admitted. "Still adjusting." Jacob nodded. "Takes time. Soon you won't even notice the creaks and groans." He leaned forward slightly. "Or you'll notice them too much. Either way, you adapt." After breakfast, Jacob took me on what he called the real tour, not the official orientation scheduled for later, but his version of what I needed to know to survive at Abyssal 9. "Marissa gives the company line," he explained as we walked through the station's maze-like corridors. "I give the practical stuff." He showed me the best shower stall with actual water pressure, which vending machine dispensed snacks without jamming, and where to find quiet spots when the claustrophobia inevitably hit. All while his eyes continually scanned our surroundings and his fingers tapped against his leg or the walls. "Main life support systems are on level 1, he said, leading me into a room filled with monitors and control panels. Displays showed oxygen levels, temperature readings, and hull integrity throughout the station. Jacob immediately checked several readings, his movements practiced and efficient despite his nervous energy. "We monitor pressure constantly," he explained, pointing to a display showing numbers that meant nothing to me. "Hull integrity is everything down here. Everything." The emphasis in his voice made my skin prickle. He guided me through the day's schedule, explaining the station's research protocols and safety procedures. Though he tried to maintain a casual demeanor, I noticed how his eyes kept returning to the hull integrity monitors every few minutes, how his fingers never stopped their anxious rhythm against whatever surface was nearest. During a break in the official orientation, I asked him about it. "About what?" His eyes darted to the wall where a slight groan of metal had just sounded. "The constant checking, the monitoring. You seem..." I searched for a diplomatic word. "Concerned." Jacob's laugh held no humor. 7 miles down, man. Trillions of tons of pressure wanting to crush us into paste. Concerned is the minimum safe operating level. The day passed in a blur of information, protocols, and introductions to equipment I'd be using. By evening, my head throbbed with fatigue and data overload. I was heading back to my quarters when I first heard it. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was faint but distinct, a rhythmic pattern against metal. I paused, listening. It came again, slightly louder. Tap, tap, tap. I turned, trying to locate the source. It seemed to be coming from somewhere in the corridor ahead, where the passageway curved out of sight. The tapping continued, growing more insistent with each repetition. Tap, 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 tap. Something about the sound pulled at me. It wasn't random noise or the normal settling of the station. This was deliberate. A pattern, a communication. I took a step toward it, then another, drawn by curiosity and something else I couldn't name. A hand clamped around my arm with surprising strength, yanking me backward. Jacob stood there, his face tight with fear, sweat beading on his forehead despite the station's cool temperature. "Don't respond," he whispered, his voice strained. "Don't even acknowledge it. It's probably just..." "It's not," he cut me off, his fingers digging into my arm. "They're testing for weakness, always testing." The tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent, as if whatever caused it knew we were listening. Impossibly, the sound seemed to shift position, moving along the corridor wall as we stood there. It was following the path we would have taken. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, 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 tap. "What is that?" I whispered, remembering Rule 2 from the card above my bunk. Never respond to tapping on the hull, no matter how persistent. Jacob's eyes were fixed on the curve of the corridor where the sound now emanated from, something that wants in. His voice was barely audible over the insistent rhythm. We backed away slowly, Jacob guiding me toward the intersection behind us. The tapping followed, traveling along the hull as if tracking our movement. Whatever caused it knew where we were, could somehow sense us through layers of reinforced steel. As we turned the corner, we nearly collided with Dr. Ung. She stood rigid in the corridor, her head tilted slightly as she listened to the tapping. Her expression was grim, lines of tension visible around her eyes and mouth. "Dr. Ung," Jacob began, but she raised a hand, silencing him without taking her eyes off the wall where the sound now concentrated. Tap, 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 tap. The rhythm changed, growing more complex and urgent. Marissa's jaw tightened as she listened, her eyes narrowing slightly. She seemed to be analyzing the pattern, perhaps even understanding something in it that escaped me. For 20 long minutes, we stood in that corridor, listening to the tapping track back and forth along the hull. No one spoke. Jacob's breathing grew increasingly shallow, and sweat now soaked through his shirt. Dr. Ung remained motionless, only her eyes moving as they followed the sound's progress. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the tapping stopped. The silence that followed felt thicker than the water surrounding us, more suffocating than the recycled air we breathed. That absence of sound pressed against my ears with physical weight, somehow worse than the noise had been, because now we were waiting, listening for something that might or might not come back. Jacob let out a shaky breath, his shoulders sagging with relief. Dr. Ung remained tense, still staring at the wall where the final taps had sounded. "It's gone?" I asked, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. Neither of them answered immediately. Finally, Dr. Ung turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "For now," she said, the words hanging in the corridor like a promise of something worse to come. The following afternoon, I finished reviewing another stack of research notes at my desk terminal, barely absorbing the information as fatigue dragged at my concentration. Sleep had been elusive after the incident with the tapping. Every normal station sound, the hum of air filtration, the creak of metal, kept me alert and listening for patterns that might suggest something more sinister. I rubbed my eyes and checked the time, almost 1400 hours. My stomach rumbled, reminding me I'd skipped breakfast after oversleeping. I saved my work and stood, stretching muscles stiff from sitting too long in the cramped quarters. The overhead lights flickered once, twice. I paused mid-stretch, watching them. The station's electrical systems were supposed to be redundant and stable, necessary when you're living in a metal box under crushing pressure. The lights steadied again, and I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I stepped into the corridor, heading for the mess hall. The station felt quieter than usual, with most of the research team locked away in their respective labs. As I approached the junction leading to the main corridor, the lights flickered again, longer this time, dimming nearly to darkness before reluctantly brightening. "That can't be good," I muttered to myself. The words had barely left my mouth when everything went black. A moment of complete darkness engulfed the station before emergency systems engaged. Red lighting strips along the floor and ceiling activated, casting the corridor in a deep crimson glow that transformed the familiar passage into something alien and threatening. The sudden silence hit me next. The constant background noise of Abyssal 9 systems had vanished, replaced by an eerie quiet, broken only by the distant sound of emergency alarms and the rush of my own breathing. The environmental systems, communication networks, and the countless machines that maintained our fragile bubble of life had all fallen silent. I pressed my hand against the wall, feeling the cool metal. 7 miles of water pressed against these walls, held back by engineering that now operated on backup power. The thought made my mouth go dry. "Stay calm," I whispered to myself. "Backup systems, protocols. This is why they have protocols." I started moving toward the main corridor, where emergency response would be coordinated. The red lighting cast grotesque shadows, stretching and distorting my silhouette against the walls. Without the circulation systems running at full capacity, the air already felt heavier, warmer. Other crew members appeared in doorways, their faces strange masks in the crimson light. Their voices echoed down the corridors, tense questions bouncing off metal walls. I recognized the fear in their eyes, the same fear that had taken root in my stomach since witnessing that face outside the window. I reached the main corridor junction where several passageways met. The emergency lighting made it hard to read the directional markers. I hesitated, orienting myself, when I heard it. "Ethan." The voice was faint, but clear, coming from the sealed maintenance wing to my right. I froze, certain I had imagined it. "Ethan, honey, can you hear me?" My heart stuttered. That voice. I knew that voice better than my own. My mother's voice, with its particular way of softening the second syllable of my name, the slight Midwestern accent she never quite lost. But my mother was 3,000 miles away in Ohio, and more importantly, the maintenance wing had been sealed off weeks ago after a leak flooded the entire section. The heavy bulkhead door separated us from millions of gallons of seawater under tremendous pressure. I knew these facts, yet that voice, her voice, called again. "Ethan, please, I need your help. I'm scared." I found myself moving toward the sealed bulkhead before I'd made a conscious decision to do so. The rational part of my brain screamed warnings, reminding me of the station rules, of the tapping, of the face at the window. But that voice pulled at something deeper than reason. Memories of childhood fevers, of skinned knees and nightmares, of the woman who had always been there when I called. The bulkhead door loomed before me, its warning signs barely visible in the red emergency light. "Sealed section. No entry. Pressure hazard." The wheel lock was secured with additional safety ties and an electronic override that would normally trigger alarms if tampered with. But with the power out, "I'm trapped, Ethan. The water's rising. Please hurry." Her voice sounded so real, so present, just on the other side of this door. "Impossible," a small voice in my mind whispered. "Nothing human could survive in there. The pressure would crush anyone instantly." My hand reached for the wheel lock anyway. Someone grabbed my wrist with startling strength, yanking me backward. I spun around to find Anna standing there, Her pale features transformed into something fierce and determined by the red lighting. Her normally trembling hands gripped me with iron stability. "That's not your mother," she said firmly, her usually quiet voice sharp with authority. "Nothing human can survive in there." The voice called again, more desperate now. "Ethan, don't leave me here, please." Anna's grip tightened. "It knows what hurts you, what you care about. It finds the voice that will make you open the door." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the station's temperature. "How does it know? It gets in your head when you sleep," she cut me off, pulling me further from the door. "We all hear them eventually, voices we can't ignore, calling from places nothing should be able to call from." The maintenance wing bulkhead rattled slightly as if something had struck it from the other side. My mother's voice changed, becoming more frantic, more accusing. "You're letting me die. How could you abandon me like this? After everything I did for you." Anna led me away, her hand still locked around my wrist. "Rule 3 exists for a reason. If you hear a voice you recognize calling from outside the station, report it immediately." Her eyes found mine in the red darkness. "Don't follow it. Ever." We made our way to the control center where Jacob hunched over his console, working by the glow of emergency lighting. Sweat beaded on his forehead as his fingers flew across the manual override controls. Dr. Ung stood nearby, her face illuminated by the red emergency strips, watching Jacob work with tense focus. "Power core shutdown was automatic," Jacob muttered without looking up. Pressure spike in the external coolant lines triggered the failsafe. His hands moved with practiced efficiency despite his obvious anxiety. "Rerouting through secondary systems now." "Timeline?" Dr. Ung asked, her voice carefully controlled. 20 minutes for partial systems, full restoration, maybe an hour if the primary hasn't been damaged." Dr. Ung noticed us standing in the doorway. "Price, Cole." Her eyes narrowed as she took in Anna's grip on my wrist, the tension in our postures. "Report." Anna released my arm. He heard a voice from the maintenance wing. Dr. Ung's expression hardened. "Whose?" "My mother's," I said, feeling suddenly foolish. "It knew my name, knew how she speaks." "It always does," Dr. Ung replied quietly. Through the corridors, the voice continued calling, growing more distant but still audible, still using my mother's exact tone and inflection. Jacob's head jerked up at the sound, his eyes wide with recognition before he forced his attention back to the controls. "Focus on restoration, Ortiz," Dr. Ung commanded, though her voice held a gentleness I hadn't heard before. "Don't listen to it." For the next hour, we worked in the emergency lighting, Dr. Ung coordinating teams to check critical systems, Anna monitoring life support readings, Jacob fighting to restore power. I was assigned to check the main corridor for any signs of damage or stress, a task that kept me moving and focused while that voice, gradually shifting from my mother's to something less human, continued its call. When the main lights finally flickered back on, the relief was palpable. The station hummed back to life around us, systems rebooting and stabilizing. The emergency alarms silenced, and the normal, reassuring sounds of Abyssal 9 returned. The voice from the maintenance wing had fallen silent 10 minutes earlier, cutting off mid-sentence as if something had pulled it away. After helping reset several monitoring stations, I made my way to the mess hall, suddenly aware of how long it had been since I'd eaten. The room was empty when I arrived, the power outage having disrupted the normal meal schedule. I opened the industrial refrigerator, looking for something simple I could prepare myself. Finding nothing appealing, I moved to the freezer, pulling open the heavy door. Rows of labeled containers filled the shelves, precisely organized and inventoried as everything was at Abyssal 9. Near the back, partially hidden behind a container of synthetic protein, I spotted an unmarked package wrapped in clear plastic. Curious, I pulled it out. Inside was what appeared to be a fish fillet, but unlike any fish I'd seen before. The flesh was an unnatural, translucent white, almost luminescent under the kitchen lights. Fine black veins ran through the meat in patterns too symmetrical to be natural. Something about it made my skin crawl. The freezer door banged shut behind me. I turned to find Anna standing there, her eyes fixed on the package in my hands. Without a word, she crossed the room and took it from me, her normally trembling hands suddenly steady and purposeful. "This doesn't belong here," she said quietly. "It was behind the... Things migrate sometimes," she interrupted, moving to the waste disposal unit at the far end of the kitchen. into our supplies, our systems, things that don't belong. She activated the disposal unit, its grinding mechanism roaring to life. Without hesitation, she dropped the package into the churning blades. The unit growled louder for a moment before returning to its normal hum. The unknown fish, reduced to particles, headed for the station's incineration system. Anna turned to the preparation counter where a clipboard held the daily food inventory log. She flipped through the pages, her finger tracing down the list of items. I moved closer, looking over her shoulder. Where today's inventory should have been, there was only a blank page. The previous day's log was complete, as was tomorrow's preliminary list. But today, nothing. Anna closed the clipboard without comment. The slight tremor had returned to her hands. "What was that?" I asked, keeping my voice low though we were alone. She didn't answer immediately, her gaze distant. Finally, she said, "Check the rules again, Cole. Rule 4. Any food items not on the inventory manifest must be incinerated without examination." But what was it? Where did it come from? Anna looked at me, really looked at me, for perhaps the first time since I'd arrived at the station. Her pale eyes held a depth of knowledge and fear that made my stomach turn. "Ask Dr. Ung about Dr. Martinez sometime," she said, "about why he's not here anymore." She left me standing alone in the mess hall, the grinding echo of the disposal unit still ringing in my ears. I thought about the translucent fish with its two perfect vein patterns, about voices that shouldn't exist calling through sealed bulkheads, about rules written on cards above our bunks. 7 miles below the surface, surrounded by crushing darkness, I was beginning to understand that Abyssal 9's purpose might be very different from what I had been told. 2 days passed at Abyssal 9 with a creeping normalcy that felt more disturbing than the outright strangeness that had preceded it. I spent hours in the lab reviewing research data, ate meals in the mess hall, and tried to sleep despite the constant mechanical sounds that permeated every corner of the station. The incident with the power outage and the voice calling my name had faded to an unsettling memory, though I still avoided passing near the sealed maintenance wing whenever possible. On the third morning after finding that strange fish in the freezer, I woke earlier than usual. The station's artificial lighting was still at night cycle levels, casting my quarters in a dim blue glow. My sleep had been fitful, filled with dreams of pale faces pressing against glass and voices calling from impossible places. I lay in bed for a few minutes, listening to the familiar sounds of the station, the hum of ventilation, the occasional groan of metal, the distant rumble of machinery. Something felt off. I couldn't place it at first, but as I became more alert, I noticed an unfamiliar smell in the air, salt, but stronger and more primal than the usual metallic tang that permeated the station. It reminded me of tide pools at low ebb, of things left exposed that should remain submerged. I pulled on my station-issued jumpsuit and stepped into the corridor. The smell was stronger here, and I noticed small droplets of water on the floor leading away from my quarters toward the residential section where the senior research team bunked. Curious, I followed the trail, my footsteps echoing in the quiet corridor. The drops became a thin stream, then actual puddles as I approached Dr. Martinez's quarters. His door stood slightly ajar, more water seeping out from underneath it. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. Water, seawater from the smell of it, soaked the floor of Martinez's quarters. His bunk was saturated, sheets and blankets dripping with brine that pooled on the metal floor beneath. The pillow was so waterlogged it had collapsed in on itself, and the mattress made a sick squelching sound under the weight of the water it had absorbed. But there was no source, no broken pipe, no crack in the hull, nothing to explain how seawater could have flooded this one room while leaving the rest of the station intact. More disturbing still was the absence of Martinez himself. His personal items remained untouched, a tablet on the desk, clothes in the storage compartments, even a half-empty coffee mug beside his terminal. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for the impossible water and the missing occupant. Research notes were scattered across the floor, the pages curling as they absorbed the moisture. I knelt to pick one up, careful not to tear the sodden paper. The ink had begun to run, but I could make out diagrams of what looked like a deep-sea organism, unlike any I'd seen in our databases. The margins were filled with Martinez's handwriting, growing increasingly erratic toward the bottom of the page. Cellular structure impossible, not fish, not anything known. And finally, underlined 3 times, "It's changing me." I dropped the paper, wiping my fingers on my jumpsuit. The water had left them feeling slick and somehow wrong, as if coated with something more than just salt and moisture. "What are you doing in here?" I turned to find Dr. Ung standing in the doorway, her expression shifting from annoyance to shock as she took in the waterlogged room. "I was following the water," I said, stepping back from the bunk. "I found it like this. Martinez is gone." The color drained from Marissa's face as she stared at the soaked bedding. For a moment, the carefully maintained authority she carried slipped, revealing something I hadn't seen in her before. Fear, raw and profound. "Get Ortiz and Price," she said, her voice tight. "Now." I found Jacob in the control room, his typical nervous energy amplified as he jumped between monitoring stations. When I told him about Martinez's quarters, his eyes widened and his hands began to shake more violently. No, he muttered, pushing past me toward the door. "Not again. Not so soon after the last one." "The last what?" I called after him, but he was already gone, moving with surprising speed down the corridor. Anna was in the medical bay, restocking supplies with the same methodical precision I'd noticed before. Unlike Jacob, she received the news with an eerie calm, simply setting down the items she was holding and following me without a word. Only the tremor in her hands, more pronounced than usual, betrayed her distress. By the time we returned to Martinez's quarters, Marissa had initiated emergency protocols. Alarm lights flashed amber instead of red, indicating a non-critical but urgent situation. The corridor outside Martinez's room was cordoned off, and Marissa stood with a tablet documenting the scene. Jacob pushed past us, going straight to a wall panel that displayed hull integrity readings. His fingers flew across the touchscreen, pulling up data streams and diagnostic reports. "Nothing," he said, his voice rising with panic. "No breaches, no leaks, no pressure anomalies. That water can't be here. It can't." Anna moved silently to the bunk and began stripping the soaked sheets, her expression unreadable. Water dripped from the fabric as she bundled it, creating more puddles on the already wet floor. "Price, what are you doing?" Marissa asked. "Someone needs to clean this up," Anna replied quietly, not pausing in her work. "We can't leave it like this." Marissa looked like she wanted to argue, but instead turned to me. "Help me search the station. Martinez might still be somewhere on board." The next 4 hours were spent in a systematic search of Abyssal 9's 5 levels. Teams of 2 checked every room, every maintenance shaft, every possible space where a person might be. I was paired with Marissa, who maintained a rigid silence as we moved through the lower levels. The only sounds were our footsteps on metal grating and the occasional drip of condensation from overhead pipes. We found nothing. No sign of Martinez, no explanation for the seawater in his quarters, no indication of where he could have gone in a sealed station 7 miles beneath the ocean surface. The search teams reconvened in the control center, where Jacob had pulled up the security feeds for the past 24 hours. He scrolled through footage from cameras positioned throughout the station, his movements growing increasingly frantic as each view showed nothing unusual. "There," Anna said suddenly, pointing to a monitor showing the corridor outside Martinez's quarters. Jacob froze the image and enlarged it. The timestamp showed 0327, the middle of the night cycle. The corridor appeared empty at first glance, but as Jacob enhanced the image, we could see a dark puddle spreading outward from beneath Martinez's door. The next frame, captured a minute later, showed the puddle had grown substantially. By 0342, water covered the entire corridor floor, reflecting the dim emergency lighting. "Go forward," Marissa instructed, leaning closer to the screen. Jacob advanced the footage. At a 3:56, the camera briefly lost feed, showing only static for 10 seconds. When the image returned, the water was gone, and the corridor was completely dry. "That's impossible," I said. "Where did it all go?" No one answered. Jacob rewound to the moment before the camera glitched, then advanced frame by frame. Just before the static, something moved at the edge of the corridor, a dark shape, indistinct and fluid, that seemed to flow rather than walk. Then static, and then nothing. "Check Martinez's movements," Marissa said, her voice flat. "When was the last time he appears on any feed?" Jacob pulled up more footage, tracking backward through time. The last confirmed sighting of Martinez was at 21:15 the previous evening, entering his quarters after leaving the lab. After that, nothing. No footage of him leaving his room, walking the corridors, or accessing any station areas. "He never left his quarters," Jacob said. the implication hanging in the air between us. Marissa straightened, her face setting into the composed mask I recognized from my first day at the station. Ortiz, continue monitoring systems for any anomalies. Price, finish cleaning the affected area and bring those sheets to the lab for analysis. Cole, with me. She turned and left the control center without waiting for acknowledgement. I followed her through the corridors, past crew members who quickly moved aside, sensing the tension that surrounded her like a force field. We rode the elevator to level 4 in silence, the level I'd been told required her personal authorization to access. The doors opened to reveal a corridor identical to the others, except for one detail. The walls here were covered in symbols etched directly into the metal. They resembled no writing system I recognized, curves and angles that hurt my eyes if I looked at them too long. Marissa led me to a door at the end of the hall marked simply, Office. Inside was a space unlike any other I'd seen at Abyssal 9. Where the rest of the station was utilitarian and sterile, this room contained personal touches. Actual paper books on shelves, a worn leather chair behind a metal desk, and photographs in frames. One showed a younger Marissa standing with a group of people in front of what looked like Abyssal 9 during its construction, all wearing the same grim expression. She closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit. For a long moment, she simply stood there, studying me as if making a final assessment. Then she moved to her desk, keyed in a code on her terminal, and turned the screen so we both could see it. "What do you know about the Challenger Deep?" she asked. "It's the deepest known point in the Earth's oceans," I replied. "Part of the Mariana Trench, almost 11 kilometers down." "And do you know what we found there 20 years ago?" I shook my head. Marissa tapped the screen, bringing up an image that at first appeared to be a geological survey, a cross-section of the ocean floor at its deepest point. But as I looked closer, I noticed anomalies in the data, patterns that couldn't be explained by natural formations. "This isn't a trench," she said quietly. "It's a door." She advanced to the next image, a structure buried beneath millions of years of sediment, vast and geometric in a way that nature never is. Its scale was difficult to comprehend, stretching for kilometers beneath the ocean floor. "Abyssal 9 isn't conducting research," Marissa continued, her voice flat. "Or rather, research isn't our primary purpose. We're maintaining a containment barrier over the entrance to something ancient and hostile that dwells in the deepest part of the trench." The reality of what she was saying took a moment to sink in. "The rules," I said slowly. "They're not safety measures. Not for our safety, no. They're protocols to prevent whatever lurks below from breaking through to the surface." Marissa's fingers tapped another key, advancing to footage I recognized from the observation lounge, the same window where I'd seen that face my first night. Except this recording showed something much worse. A mass of pale, writhing forms pressing against the glass, features shifting between human and something decidedly not. "The crew members who've gone missing over the years," she continued, "they didn't quit or transfer to other stations. They broke the rules, Cole, and they were taken." "Taken? By what?" "We don't have a name for it. The previous inhabitants of this planet might have called it a god or a demon. The original research team labeled it Entity Abyssal 1, but that hardly captures what it is." She shut off the screen, as if unwilling to look at the images any longer. "What matters is that it's contained mostly by the barrier we maintain. But the barrier needs sacrifices occasionally." My mouth went dry. Sacrifices? Not willing ones. It takes those who break the barriers between our world and its, looking into the abyss when it's most active, responding to its attempts at communication, consuming what it sends us. The image of that strange, translucent fish with its black veins flashed in my mind. "Martinez ate the fish," I said, the realization like ice in my veins. Marissa nodded once. 3 days ago. Anna found him in the kitchen with the remains. She reported it immediately, but it was too late. Once consumed, the change begins. The water in his quarters is just the first sign. The first sign of what? Of transformation. Of claiming. The entity takes those who open themselves to it, who break the barriers between us. They become something else. She looked directly at me, her gaze unflinching. Something no longer human. The weight of what she was saying settled over me like the trillions of tons of water pressing against the station's hull. Everything I'd experienced since arriving, The face at the window, the tapping, the voice calling my name, took on a new and terrible significance. "How many?" I asked, surprised at the steadiness of my own voice. "How many what? How many have been taken?" Marissa was silent for a long moment. 17 in the 20 years since we established Abyssal 9. Martinez makes 18. I thought of the soaked bunk, the research notes with their increasingly frantic marginalia, the security footage showing water that appeared and disappeared impossibly. "And there's no way to get them back?" "Back?" Marissa's laugh held no humor. "There is no back, Cole. There's only down and deeper. Once the entity takes someone, they're gone. Part of it now." The full horror of Abyssal 9's purpose unfolded before me. Not a research station, but a prison, a barrier keeping something ancient and malevolent from reaching the surface world. And we were its wardens, maintaining the containment at the cost of our own people when the rules were broken. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now we continue. We maintain the barrier. We follow the rules." Marissa's expression hardened, and we hope that whatever Martinez has become doesn't find a way back inside. I sat on the edge of my bunk, trying to make sense of everything Marissa had told me. My quarters felt smaller than usual, the walls too close. I checked the time. Just after 10 at night. Sleep seemed impossible, but I knew I needed to try. Tomorrow would bring new challenges now that I understood what we were really facing at Abyssal 9. I changed into the thin cotton t-shirt and shorts that served as standard-issue sleepwear and lay down, staring at the metal ceiling. The constant mechanical sounds of the station seemed louder tonight. The hum of ventilation, the occasional creak of metal adjusting to pressure changes, the distant rumble of machinery keeping us alive. The station rules card hung above my bed, its laminated surface catching the light. 5 simple rules that weren't about safety protocols or station regulations, but protection from something that wanted to claim us. I'd already broken the first rule my very first night. The thought made my skin feel cold. Just as my eyes grew heavy, the lights changed. The normal illumination cut out, replaced by pulsing red emergency strips that bathed everything in crimson. They flashed in a steady rhythm that made the shadows dance across the walls. I sat up immediately, my heart racing. This was Rule 5, lie flat during red emergency light flashes. Without hesitation, I slid off the bunk onto the cold metal floor and crawled underneath. The space was tight, designed for storage rather than occupation. I pressed my body flat against the floor as the rule dictated, facing upward toward the bottom of my mattress. The station creaked. Not the usual settling sounds, but a deep, agonized groan that came from all around me. The metal walls shuddered, vibrating against my back. The pressure gauge near my bed swung into the yellow zone, then edged toward red. Something was happening outside the station. The groaning intensified, becoming a screech of metal under strain. The walls buckled slightly, as if the entire station were being squeezed by a giant hand. The pressure was exceeding design limits. I could feel it in my ears, a painful pressure building as the air inside the station compressed. Through the thin mattress above me, I heard it. Movement outside the hull. Not the random noises of ocean currents or deep-sea creatures, but purposeful motion. Something massive glided along the exterior, something that made the reinforced walls of Abyssal 9 feel as insubstantial as paper. Whatever moved out there was enormous. The motion continued past my quarters, dragging along the hull with a sound like wet skin sliding over metal. My mind struggled to comprehend the size of something that could make contact with so much of the station at once. The red lights continued to flash, bathing my cramped hiding place in pulses of crimson and shadow. I tried to steady my breathing, to calm the panic rising in my chest. The rules existed for a reason. This was why we were supposed to lie flat, to make ourselves as small and unnoticeable as possible while something searched for us. From the quarters next to mine, I heard a sound that wasn't mechanical, a whimper, barely audible through the wall. Jacob. The steady tapping of his fingers had been replaced by short, panicked gasps for air. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." His voice came faintly through the shared ventilation duct. "Not again. Please, not again." On my other side, where Anna's quarters were located, I heard nothing but steady, measured breathing. The contrast was striking, Jacob falling apart while Anna seemed almost meditative, as if this terrifying experience was something she had weathered many times before. A new sound joined the groaning metal and Jacob's fearful whimpers. Tapping. Not the random, curious tapping I'd heard days ago, but complex patterns that seemed to communicate something specific. The rhythm changed and evolved, moving around the station as if searching for weak points or responses. Then came the voices. They started as whispers, barely audible above the station's protests, but grew louder until they filled the corridors outside my quarters. They called in languages I'd never heard before, sounds that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. The words twisted and turned in ways that made my head throb when I tried to understand them. Yet somehow I almost could. The meaning hovered just beyond comprehension, like a word on the tip of my tongue that I couldn't quite recall. Whatever they were saying, listening to it felt wrong, as if the sounds themselves were trying to rewrite something in my brain. I covered my ears, pressing my hands tightly against my head. It didn't help. The voices seemed to bypass my ears entirely, resonating directly inside my skull. Minutes stretched into hours. The red lights continued their rhythmic flashing, never slowing or speeding up. My body grew stiff from lying motionless on the hard floor, but I didn't dare move. The rule was clear: lie flat until the lights returned to normal. Through it all, the pressure continued to build. My sinuses ached and swallowing became difficult. The station wasn't just under assault from outside. It felt like the very atmosphere inside was being compressed, as if something was trying to crush us from all directions at once. Just when I thought I couldn't endure another moment, the voices stopped. The tapping ceased. The pressure eased slightly, though the red lights continued to flash. The sudden silence was almost as unnerving as the sounds had been. Then, without warning, normal lighting returned. The red emergency strips powered down, and the standard overhead lights flickered back to life. The abrupt transition made me blink rapidly, my eyes struggling to adjust after hours in pulsing crimson. I waited a full minute before sliding out from under the bunk, my muscles protesting after being held in one position for so long. Standing was a challenge. My legs felt weak and unsteady. I took a deep breath, noticing that the air tasted different, saltier, with an underlying bitterness that hadn't been there before. I opened my door cautiously and stepped into the corridor. The station appeared intact, but unmistakably changed. Along the metal walls, strange symbols had been scratched into the surface, curves and angles that hurt my eyes when I tried to focus on them, similar to the ones I'd seen on level 4 but more crude, as if hastily carved. Other crew members emerged from their quarters, looking dazed and frightened. No one spoke. We moved together through the corridors, drawn toward the common area by some unspoken understanding. As we passed the observation lounge on level 2, I noticed several people stopping to stare. I joined them, looking through the reinforced windows that had previously shown the illuminated seabed outside the station. 3 of the 6 windows now showed only impenetrable darkness. Not the darkness of the deep ocean. This was different, more absolute. The exterior lights were still functioning. I could see their beams extending outward from the station. But where they should have illuminated sand and rock, they simply stopped, as if the light itself was being consumed by something that refused to be seen. Marissa was already in the common area when we arrived, standing at the center of the room. The ordeal had visibly affected her. New lines creased her face, and strands of gray had appeared in her hair that hadn't been there yesterday. She looked like she had aged years in a single night. Jacob entered after me, his face pale and slick with sweat. He kept close to the wall, one hand always maintaining contact with the metal surface as if needing the physical reassurance of the station's continued existence. Anna came last, her expression unchanged, though the tremor in her hands seemed more pronounced. When everyone had gathered, Marissa spoke. Her voice was hoarse, as if she'd been screaming, though I hadn't heard her during the event. What we just experienced was a containment breach attempt, she said, not bothering with reassurances or comfort. The barrier is weakening faster than we anticipated. She moved to a display screen on the wall and brought up a diagram of the station in relation to what lay beneath it. The structure Marissa had shown me earlier, the door buried beneath the ocean floor, was pulsing with energy readings that spiked far beyond the scale of the measuring equipment. The entity is becoming more active, more aggressive in its attempts to break through, she continued. Our current containment methods won't hold much longer. No one asked questions. We all just stood there, exhausted and afraid, waiting for her to tell us what came next. The station was designed with contingency measures for this scenario, Marissa said, her eyes moving across our faces. The barrier can be reinforced, but it requires... She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. It requires permanent oversight. Someone needs to stay. A murmur went through the group as the implication sank in. The rest of you will evacuate to the surface, she continued. I've already sent the emergency protocol to headquarters. Transport will arrive within 48 hours. Stay for how long? Someone asked from the back of the room. Marissa's expression didn't change. Permanently. The barrier must be maintained without interruption. If it fails completely, if what's down there reaches the surface, it won't stop until it has consumed everything. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the constant mechanical sounds of the station seemed muted, as if Abyssal 9 itself was holding its breath. I'll remain as station commander, Marissa added. I need one volunteer to stay with me. The rest of you will return to the surface and be reassigned. Anna stepped forward without hesitation. I'll stay. Jacob made a small, choked sound, his eyes wide with disbelief. Are you certain? Marissa asked, studying Anna's face. I've been here longest after you, Anna replied, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. I know what needs to be done. Marissa nodded once. The rest of you, pack only essential personal items. 1 bag each. Be ready to depart as soon as the transport arrives. The meeting ended, and people drifted away in stunned silence, returning to quarters to prepare for evacuation. I lingered, watching as Marissa and Anna spoke quietly in the corner of the room, their expressions grim, but resolved. The station felt different now, not just because of the strange symbols etched into the walls or the windows that showed only darkness. There was a sense of finality, of boundaries being drawn between those who would return to the world above and those who would remain here, 7 miles down, guarding the door to something ancient and malevolent. I thought about everything I'd experienced since arriving at Abyssal 9, the face at the window, the tapping on the hull, the voice that had called to me using my mother's words, the strange fish Anna had destroyed. All of it made a terrible kind of sense now. As I walked back to my quarters to pack, I ran my fingers along the newly formed symbols on the corridor walls. They seemed to pulse slightly under my touch, though I knew that must be my imagination. What wasn't my imagination was the way the metal felt warm and almost wet, as if the barrier between our world and what lay beyond had grown thin enough for something to seep through.